I am very happy to be here this morning. I am very happy to have each and every one of you here this morning. And I am looking forward to an opportunity to share a couple of things with you and also have you share with me and each other throughout our time together this morning. I want to start this morning's time together with a question for reflection. And when I say reflection, what I mean is I don't expect you to answer out loud. If you want to, I'm not going to tell you you can't. But the first thing I want us to ask is, what's been your biggest failure in 2024? Just kind of think about that for a second. What's been your biggest failure this year? And as you're thinking about that, I want to ask a subsequent question. Why is that question so hard for us? I mean, I think if I were to say, have you failed? I don't think anybody here would be so egotistical as to say, no, I haven't failed. I've perfect year, December 7th, and I haven't made a mistake yet. All right? No one's going to say that. And yet, as I asked the question, I saw everybody's face do the exact same thing. And it's for two reasons, right? It's either because we don't want to admit our failure, which was touched on just a second ago, right? Or it's because we know, or at least we believe, that failure is a bad thing.
Or we have so many, we're not really sure which one the biggest is.
Fair enough. Here. Now, here's what's interesting too, though. If I had asked you to speak out your failure, I'm going to go out on a limb, and I don't know because no one said anything, but I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say you would not have given me your biggest failure. You would have given me one of those failures that's not really a failure. Like, I was late this morning. That's what I would have given. That's not, I mean, it's a failure, don't get me wrong, but that's not like a life-altering, oh my goodness, it's keeping me awake at night failure. And why would we have given those types of failures?
Quick question. So how can we consider if the thing that we did is a failure or not? Like, how can we categorize it? Because for you, like being late, for me, that's not a fail. So, but you consider it as a failure.
Yeah.
He says, whatever.
That's a fantastic question, and I will answer it by the end, I promise. I promise that, because we're going to get to that. That's the last point we're going to make is what is an actual failure. No. So we will absolutely get to that. But thank you for bringing that up, because that you bring up an excellent point, and that is that failure doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. Now, how many of you have taken some form of like job seeking strategies or job prep or interview prep or anything like that? Anybody ever taken something like that? Maybe it was high school, maybe it was here. I know you guys do job skills here, right? Perfect. So one of the things that often has been taught in those types of classes is the idea that when you get asked what is your biggest failure or what's your biggest strength and weakness, you get told that when you answer the what is your biggest weakness part, what should you do? Who's got the answer? What are you taught to do about your biggest weakness? Turn it into a positive, right? And so we take the time and we say, you know what, I'm a workaholic. I work too hard and sometimes it consumes my life and I just do too much. And here's the reality, if you're an HR recruiter, you're not buying it, okay? Because it's not a real challenge, it's not a real failure, but that's how we kind of default in our mind. Why do we do that? Because we don't actually like to admit where we struggle. We're afraid of being judged. We're human beings. Everyone here is a human being? We don't have any Elon Musk robots in here yet? Okay, everyone's a human being. And so that's why this question is so challenging. Because we think failure is bad and we want to cover it up. And so what do we have the tendency to do when we start talking about failure? Well, it's not really my fault. Traffic was bad. My printer didn't work. Fill in blank of your excuse, my excuse, and that's what we do when we start talking about failure. And what we don't do is say, I didn't manage my time effectively this morning. I didn't pre-print the things. I didn't follow up on time, and I failed. And maybe is being here 15 minutes, or actually a half hour after I intended to be here, the end of the world? No. but acknowledging my own stuff. And so that really is the first part, own our failure. The first step to overcoming failure is to stop denying it, which is so hard. It's so hard. It really is. Like, we don't think it is, but it really is, because our default is not to own it. Our default is to excuse it. Our default is to put it off on somebody else. And if you just think about the last 4 or 5 times something happened in your life or my life, I'm not pointing at you, this is an us situation. If we think, all right, let me think about just the last 4 or 5 times that something went differently than I had planned. Right, let's not call it a failure. I didn't show up when I planned to. The meal didn't turn out the way that I meant for it to. I didn't get the grade that I expected. I didn't finish the project on time. Whatever it was. And now think about when you told somebody about it, and ask yourself, did you own it or did you excuse it? And our tendency, maybe you're like, no, John, I got this. I own it every time. I'm the one that's like, it was me. But more than likely, if you're like me and you're a human being, the tendency is like, well, I was on time, but then I got a phone call that came in, and then this happened, and then that happened, and so really what I did isn't all that bad. And so the first step is we've just got to own it. We've got to stop being afraid of it, because when we are afraid of failure, when we minimize our failure, when we pretend like we don't have any failure, they only get bigger. Now, who can tell me what the word exponential means? It's a big old word. What is exponential? Anyone ever seen that number? Like you have like maybe a number 2, and then at the little tiny corner, there's like another 2 or maybe another 3. So in math, that's the exponent. And the exponent means that it multiplies that amount of times. So if I have the number 3, and then above it I have a 4, that little tiny 4, that means it's 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, times 3 is, what was that going to be, 81? Huh? A lot, right? So exponential. So when I say exponential failure, when I say when we don't acknowledge, when we don't own it, it exponentially gets bigger, I don't mean that it goes from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. I mean it goes from, or maybe I should say 3 to 6 to 9 to 12. I mean it goes from 3 to 9 to 27 to 81. Because it gets bigger and bigger. And let me give you a couple examples of what I'm talking about. Now, has anybody here ever done anything in the stock market? No? Okay, not a problem. How many of you guys listen to people on the radio and you hear about the stock market, or you watch the TV and you see the little ticker and you're like, I have no idea what any of that means? Perfect, wonderful. No, hey, welcome to the club, okay? Basically, here's what it is. People decide that a business is doing well and they go, I want a piece of that. All right, kind of like Front-Porch Housing. Man, we really like the mission, so we're going to donate to that. But if Front-Porch Housing was a for-profit business, it might be like, hey, check it out, Front-Porch Housing. I'm going to give you a little bit of money so that you can do something cool, and then when you make money, I want some of that back. Well, then it blew way out of proportion, and so now it's like, hey, I've got a little bit of Front-Porch Housing that I own. Do you want to buy it from me? And that's what the stock market is. It's a bunch of people exchanging pieces of a company. Well, how many of you ever heard of Tesla, the company Tesla? They make cars, they got run around, right? Okay. Did anybody know that Tesla has, or maybe I should say had, a competitor called Nikola? Anybody ever heard of the company Nikola? There's a reason for that. Nikola was also producing an alternative fuel vehicle. So Tesla is what kind of vehicle? Electric, very good. Nikola was producing a hydrogen-powered vehicle at the same time that Tesla was developing their EV. Tesla came out and said, we figured it out. And this would have been back in like early 2020, right? When you started to see Teslas roll off the line. And Nikola went, oh shoot, we got to remain competitive. And so Nikola put out a video of their prototype vehicle driving down the road. And so if you had wanted to buy a little piece of Nikola in early 2020, you would have paid about $300 for one share of Nikola. Remember that, $300. Okay? But when they released their video, everyone went, oh, a hydrogen-powered vehicle. That's amazing. Hydrogen is just basically water. Can you imagine if your vehicle ran on water? And so their stock shot up from $300 all the way to $2,000 a share. But you'll notice it didn't stay there. Because as it turned out, the video that they produced was not a video of their truck driving down the road. It was a video of their truck rolling down a hill. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but if vehicles only can go down the hill, they're not very useful. And eventually, their stock looked a whole lot like that hill that the truck rolled down. And if you would have bought their stock on Wednesday of this week, it would not have been $2,000. It would not have been $300. You would have paid a whopping $1.84. And here's what's funny. The company who had this massive failure, if they'd come out and they just said, we haven't figured it out yet, would it have hurt them? Well, of course. But it wouldn't look like this. This is the result of a company that refused to acknowledge their failures. And because they didn't say, we haven't figured it out, but we're still working on it, and they pretended like they did have it figured out, they're a laughingstock, and no one in this room had ever heard of Nikola. Exponential failure. Now, it's easy to look at a company, it's easy to look at somebody else, it's easy to be like, man, they really screwed up. So let's point at me. Let's say, okay, it's easy to look at somebody else, but when we don't admit our failure, when we don't acknowledge our failure, it's exponential. Let me tell you a little bit about my story. I grew up in, I'd say low class, but low mid class. We were right next to the trailer park, but we weren't in the trailer park, okay? Oldest of five, one single income family. Didn't have it everything, but had a good, solid upbringing. And because of that, I was very entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial means I like to start businesses. And as an entrepreneur, as a 12-year-old kid, I was the richest 12-year-old kid on the block. I was mowing lawns for money. This is in Colorado. I was mowing lawns. I was raking leaves. I was shoveling sidewalks. I had convinced the little Texaco to let me come in and stock their shelves at 4 in the morning. I was selling stuff from catalogs. If there was a way to make money, I was making money. And at 12 years old, I was doing pretty stinking well. It was also at 12 years old that I started martial arts, and I was pretty good at martial arts. Good enough that by the time I was 15, I was an assistant instructor, and by the time I was 18, I had over 500 students in the Phoenix metropolitan area where I now live, or where I then lived. Very successful. And because I had this illusion of success, you know what I never admitted? Ever? Failure. If something went wrong, it was somebody else's fault. Or I just denied it altogether. I wasn't going to admit it. And despite all of these successes, what I actually had was significant character issues that I refused to acknowledge, I refused to deal with, I refused to let anybody else say anything. You couldn't tell me nothing. And what did I say? I said that when we refuse to admit our failure, it becomes exponentially worse. Well, that was true for me. 19 years old, 4-bedroom house that was mine, my own car, engaged to be married, 500 students, living a life of great success. Went with 3 of my friends and decided that we were going to light a fire. My best friend did not make it out of that fire alive, and I was sentenced to 14 years in the Department of Corrections. Exponential failure. If I had acknowledged character issues, if I had been willing to admit failures, probably could have stopped that. Probably could have made better decisions. But I was always right. I was never the one that made the bad decision. And that resulted in me, my cell didn't look quite like that. That was much nicer than what I experienced. But seriously, I spent 14 years, 12 actually inside of prison, and the last 2 under community supervision. That surprises people, but it's absolutely true. When I say that I know what it's like to fail on a massive level, I mean it. And I know what it means to suffer the consequences of failure on a massive level. But failure is not the end. Failure gives us the opportunity, if we are willing to admit it, to do something pretty cool. So we have to admit it. When we hide our failures, we do 3 things. We prioritize ego over growth. If we hide our failure, we say, I am more important. My ego, really my image, the who I want you to think I am, is more important than actually being who I say I am. Secondarily, we create a culture of perfection. Has anybody ever worked or been in a place where there was this weird expectation that everything was always going to be perfect? Did you ever feel like you could meet that expectation? No. So when we are part of the problem, we contribute to being part of the problem when we end up in a situation where we don't want to acknowledge our failure. Because if I won't acknowledge my failure, it's a lot harder for you to acknowledge yours. And if you don't want to acknowledge your failure, now we have this weird pseudo culture that says, we don't make mistakes. We're too good to make mistakes. And so we create this egocentric kind of environment that says we're perfect, and we create this culture of perfection. And here's what ends up happening. And this is what happened to me. So I'm speaking from experience. This isn't me preaching. This is me sharing. We create a personal pedestal. We create this situation that is unmaintainable. We can't maintain this perfection, but we put ourselves on this pedestal of look at me. That's exactly what I did. I was on this pedestal, I had all these people, everyone looking at me, and I thought I was on the top of the world, and you can't maintain it. But this is what happens. When we hide our failures, we put ego over growth, we create this culture of perfection, and we put ourselves on this pedestal. And here's where it gets tricky. Because maybe you're a part of a group, maybe we'll just use Front-Porch Housing right now. And so you say, well, I can't acknowledge when I fail because I don't want to discourage other people on their journey. I don't want to let them know because then they're going to be like, well, they look up to me. I've been around a little while. I've been doing this. And if I tell them when I fail, well, then they might think there's no hope for them. And I just want you to know if that's a burden that you're carrying, if you kind of have this idea that you need to succeed and you need to pretend to always be successful and never admit your failures because it might discourage somebody else, I just want you to know it's actually going to do the opposite. Because it creates that culture of perfection that nobody actually likes. And where we actually respect somebody is when someone will say, especially if they're like a leader or somebody that we're looking up to, and they're willing to say, hey, Missy, I screwed up. I messed this up, and here's what I learned from it, and I'm going to do better next time. That's where we respect somebody. But there often is this I'm going to say it's like an unspoken expectation that when you know you've been around a while, you're supposed to have it all figured out, and you're just like, well, now I can't tell anybody when I fail. And I don't know how many of you guys are a part of any form of church, but that is one of the reasons why so many church leaders fail massively. Because they keep everything, and they've failed for years, but they can't tell anybody, they don't confess it, they don't let anybody know about it, and so it gets worse and worse and worse until all of a sudden their ministry explodes. And so it all boils down to this reality that we're putting our ego, our reputation instead of our character above our growth, which creates this culture of perfection. And in this culture of perfection, now I can't admit I failed. And so that puts me on this pedestal. And now everyone's looking up to me because they think I've got it figured out. I know I don't got it figured out. We all know we don't have it figured out. But we put ourselves in this self-fulfilling prophecy and cycle of this problem. And so what happens? We're on our pedestal and we go right back over to ego, which means now we have to pretend we haven't failed, which makes our pedestal a little bit higher. So we go right back over to ego, and then and you see it just gets worse and worse and worse until a 14-year prison sentence gets sentenced, and all of a sudden you're like, oh dang, maybe I don't have it figured out. This sucks. So with that being said, I really only trust people who have failed. This is kind of a weird thing to say, right? Because we wouldn't normally say that. We'd be like, no, I trust the person that has gone through something maybe, but think about it. If someone hasn't failed, Like massively probably, because we're all human beings, okay? So if someone doesn't admit failure, if they're the one that's always right, if they're the one that you really like, man, that dude or that girl, they have it figured out. Like I just wish, I wish I could be like them. They are fantastic. And you don't know any aspect of their life where they have actually failed. I would challenge us all to say that if we haven't failed, there's only one of two options. The first one and most likely one is we're lying. And so I'm not going to trust you if you're going to lie to me. If you're going to pretend like you have never failed, you're lying to me and I'm not going to trust you. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. But there is a second option. There is a second option because people who have not massively failed often have also not massively done anything. I think of them as knights in shining armor. Now, I know that the majority of the people in this room are female, and so there's a romantic notion about a knight in shining armor. Oh. But have you ever thought about what a knight in shining armor would mean? The only knights that are in shining armor are the ones posted up by the gate not doing nothing. The ones that actually went out and fought and battled and achieved and overcame and went through some stuff, their armor is not shiny. It's dinged and it's scuffed and it's muddy and it's bloody and it's dirty and it's not shining. You've gone through something and so you've got battle scars. And so maybe there's somebody that looks like they've got it all together and it's easy to be like, whoa, that's amazing. But the reality is it's because they haven't done anything. They've played it safe their whole life, and they stood in their post, and they've got their sword in front of them, but they never actually went to battle. They didn't actually have to go through anything, and unfortunately, nothing against people that haven't gone through some hard stuff, but most people who haven't gone through hard stuff don't have very deep character. It's just the reality. You have to go through hard things and have to fail in order to really have something that runs deep. And I say that again from a spirit of humility where I had no character. I had all the success, none of the character. But the failure is what allowed me to work through that. And a 14-year prison sentence will get your attention a little bit. I mean, I was 19 years old when that happened. That was my life. You know, when you're 19, you probably don't remember much back past, 3 or 4? So 14 years out of 19, like, that's a life sentence in a sense. And that gets me the opportunity to go, oh, dang, I probably should evaluate what I'm doing. And here's the cool thing. In that moment, if I had wanted to stay on my pedestal, the 5 o'clock news made sure I did not. The 5 o'clock news made sure for like 4 days straight that I did not. And to this day, if you look my name up on Google now, there's a lot of good things that have come from this, but there are still some very, very negative news pieces out there about me. Because I failed. And that pedestal, long fall. So I only trust people who have failed. And I think that if you have people, the people that have the best opportunity to make an impact in the world, the best chance to really live a meaningful life are the people who have navigated hard things. Anybody who has achieved tremendous results has almost always gone through tremendous difficulty. And I think that's something to consider. So, people who have failed. People who have failed. We know we have to admit it. So people who have failed. While there are exceptions, it's consistently found that if you have failed, you tend to be more empathetic. You ever felt like that? Someone that just could be like, no, I get it. I've been there. I've done that. I've gone through that. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to look down on you. We're going to go through this together. They also tend to be more compassionate. I mean, that's what we really want. We want to be people of compassion. I don't think anybody sitting in this room is like, you know what I would really like? I'd like to be like one of those high-nosed people that looks down on everybody. And I want everybody to really know I'm better than them. I don't think anybody wants that. But it's the people that have failed that are this way. The people that have never gone through anything, they're not compassionate, they're not empathetic. They're the ones that are walking around looking down their nose at everybody. And they tend to also be more communicative. And this is something that I think is really important because when we have failed and we're willing to acknowledge that, we're also often willing to share it. And that is what lets us help other people. But that gets into the next thing that we want to talk about. So before we get to our next segment, I like to have us do something together. Does everyone have something to write with? Each of you wrote something on your page. That is your journey. I would encourage you to maybe, if you haven't, do that again. You can use the same questions, the same prompts. We're not going to do it right now. We're not going to take more time today. But maybe there's something in your life, a failure that you were never going to write on that page in this room because you weren't sure. Like I know I said you didn't have to talk about it, but there was no way you were writing it on that page. And maybe there's another thing that would be beneficial for you to work through and develop those synaptic connections in your brain to working through that failure. And maybe that would be helpful, maybe it wouldn't, but it's an invitation. And if you guys want, I can send, well, Missy has the thing, so if you guys want her to print more of those for you, they're available. The benefit of sharing, you don't have to share, but the benefit of sharing is that people who have failed can better help others. This is just simply true. People that have never failed are often not very helpful. They might be judgmental, but they're not very helpful. But people that have failed and people that are willing to own it and people that are willing to share it with others have this opportunity to help others, because when we recognize our own humanity, it gives us a better opportunity to recognize the dignity of those around us. When we are willing to share our failures, there's also even benefit to us. Yes, we're helping others, but here's what's cool, right? We had 4 people that shared here today. Now, I have no idea what's going to happen after I leave today, but here's what can happen. Missy talked about a sounding board. Everyone knows what she means. It's kind of somebody she can speak to and they're going to give her feedback, right? Now, if you don't have somebody like that, I highly recommend it. But here's what's interesting, even if you don't. You've just shared, 4 of you, have shared a failure in your life here today. And here's what you got by default. You exposed yourself as vulnerable, and now you're more trustworthy. But you also just gained something that we like to call accountability. When Missy goes to her sounding board and says, tell me what this means, well, now that man or woman or that person, they have more opportunity to go back to Missy in a week or two and say, how have you been feeling about them? Are you starting to have more controlled emotions about them? Are you starting to see them in a positive light? And because we've shared here today, maybe you, I'm assuming that's your wife? Yes. Perfect. So maybe your wife now can be like, hey honey, thank you so much. And now if you decide to take a side job, she now has the more boldness to speak into your life and say, hey, you're welcome to take the side job. The bills are still due, but just remember, family is your priority. And that was something you learned 6 months ago, and I just don't want you to forget that. And in love, there's accountability there that helps you not fail again because we were willing to share that failure with others. And the same thing is true for each person that shared. And even if you didn't share, if you will share it with someone, you can help them, and they're also going to help you. And then you're also, when you're willing to share, how many of you, as somebody was talking, one of the 4, felt like, oh, that's me too? Come on, get your hands up. I am not the only one that resonated with time management. Who struggles with time management? Okay, there we go. All right, who here struggles with some financial insecurity? Perfect. Who here struggles trying to balance your responsibilities with family time? Who here has somebody in their life that you know you default to the negative about, even if they don't always deserve it? Okay. So those of you that shared, most of the room could resonate, and so you were serving them, I call it consolation. It feels good to know, oh my goodness, I'm not the only one that sucks at this. There's others, and we can build each other up, and we can hold each other accountable, and we can do good things. And none of that is possible if we go back to those first couple slides where we don't want to admit our failure and we're prioritizing ego over growth and a culture of perfection, and we're putting ourselves on a pedestal. None of that's possible. It's only when we're willing to share it that we can help others, we can treat them with dignity, they can give us accountability, and together we can grow. And that really is where we want to get. A minute ago, no. probably 45 minutes ago, I was asked, what is failure? Because you said being late, but that's not really failure to me. Well, here's the interesting thing. I've spent the first giant section of our time together telling you, you got to own your failure. You got to admit your failure. We want to get it out there. And yet now I'm going to tell you that there's no such thing as failure. Because there's no such thing as failure. Because failure is a paradox. And a paradox is two things that are true that contradict each other. Why is failure a paradox? Failure is a paradox because there is no such thing as failure. We'll go to, and there's more to that sentence. We'll talk about Albert Einstein. Maybe some of you have heard of this, but Albert Einstein, Thomas Edison, my apologies. Thomas Edison, he was the one that invented the incandescent light bulb. And he failed a lot of times. Now, some people have said, he said 10,000. I don't think he actually said 10,000. I think this is the most accurate quote. He says, I've not failed 700 times. I've not failed once. I now know 700 ways that will not work. And when I have eliminated all the ways that will not work, I will have found the one that does. There is no such thing as failure as long as there is growth. When we grow from an experience, it is no longer a failure. Because we learned, we became better, we became more effective as human beings. How many of you guys have ever used those little square pieces of paper that look like that? What's that called?
Sticky note.
Sticky note. Who produces sticky note? Anyone know? Well, Post-it does. I'm sorry. And who owns Post-it? My apologies. I got ahead of myself there. A company called 3M. Very good. 3M owns Post-it. Post-it makes up a giant segment of 3M's revenue. Did you know Post-its were born out of failure? Anybody ever heard that before? So here's the thing about 3M. 3M doesn't believe in failure. They think failure only happens when we don't learn. And so here's what they do. If something doesn't turn out right in their development labs, they never throw it away. They file it away for somebody else, and they've got a whole team that takes all the failures and sees if there's any value in them. Anybody want to guess what they were trying to invent when that ended up being the Post-it note?
Glue.
What kind of glue?
Something that stays sticky.
They wanted to find the strongest adhesive that they possibly could develop. They wanted something more adhesive than super glue, better than Gorilla Glue. And so instead, what they developed was the stickiness that would stick to your monitor for exactly as much time as a day before you need the sticky note. And then it would fall off and you'll never find it again. They were in the lab, they're trying to develop this super sticky glue. They failed. It didn't work. It's like the least sticky glue. Okay, didn't work. File it away, goes into the cabinet. Eventually another team comes and gets it, puts it on the back of paper, and we have sticky notes. It wasn't a failure. It was a miss from what they were trying to do, but it had value. And so when I say failure is a paradox, I mean that failure, you asked what is failure? Failure only exists if we don't learn. We have to acknowledge the miss. We have to acknowledge, and so if you want to say, well, how do I learn from it? You have to acknowledge something didn't go the way you wanted it to. You didn't have the feeling or the impression about a person that you wish you would have, and you recognize that's not productive. You didn't make your financial goal, and you recognize that it's X number of years in a row, and you're going to fix it. You didn't have time for your son, and so now you're going to make a change. You didn't have time for your family. Didn't even know your family. You have to acknowledge those things. They're misses. They're things that are not the way we wish they would have been. But assuming we have something on those here's what I learned from it lines, they're no longer failures. This workshop used to be called Failure, what do we call it? Something like the step on the path to success. And we've changed the title a couple times because it was too long and wordy. Now we just call it Embracing Failure. But the idea here is this. When we learn, we're one step closer to success. And then we fail and we learn and we're another step closer to success. And eventually, you end up with one of the more popular products that 3M builds. So something I'm going to give you, we're not going to do this in class, but one of the things I recognize is that when we are in a place where we have seen the failure, we know we don't know our kids, we know that we're not spending time with them, we know we didn't meet our financial goal, we just had someone slap us upside the head with a truth bomb and say, what are you talking about? And so at that point, sometimes we're like, okay, what do I need to learn from this? But here's where we tend to still struggle. We tend to still struggle pre-failure. We tend to still be in a position where we don't like to make decisions because what if I make the wrong decision? Anybody ever felt like that? So I'm going to give you another worksheet, and this worksheet is not to be done right now. You can, but this is actually for you to take home with you. And this is called not confession of failure. This is called confession of fear. And the idea behind this worksheet is to go through a very similar process that we went through with the failure that has already occurred, but engage it from the perspective of something that has not yet happened. And so we would say, my name is, and I'm afraid that I might fail when I set my financial goal for 2025. And if I mess this up, I will face, and you can put the consequences, right? I will face embarrassment and continued financial insecurity and whatever, okay? But if I succeed, it'll be epic because I will have done something that I've been working for 2, 4, 5, 10 years to accomplish, and I will have the money. But either way, I'm going to learn some things. I'm going to learn how to track my money more effectively. I'm going to learn how to save more. I'm going to learn how to say no more, whatever the things are. And I can share that with others because it's going to be a journey no matter what I choose. But I'm not going to let failure or the fear of failure stop me from setting the goal because it's the same issue. If we're afraid of failure and so we don't make that commitment, we don't do that thing, we don't set that goal, we're right back to ego over growth. Because I'm afraid of what someone might say about me or think about me if I don't actually succeed, so I'm not going to try. And so I'm going to create this culture of perfection that says, well, I don't fail because I don't try, and I'm going to be that knight in shining armor, and I'm going to stand real tall and pretty, but I'm not going to actually do anything with my life. And hopefully I'll get put on a pedestal and people will look up to me, but it's all going to be a facade because I'm not actually doing anything worthwhile. I'm not actually living boldly, and therefore I'm not ever doing anything great. So this is an opportunity for you to reflect on later, to go through at your own time, share with yourself, maybe share with somebody that, maybe your mentor, somebody that means somebody that means something much to you. That's not the way that sentence is supposed to work, but you know what I mean. And use this as a way to try to forge some new synaptic connections. Let's wrap this up. Henry Ford said, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. The money one is the easy one. I keep going back over here because money is so easy. It's very tangible. You know exactly if you succeeded at the end of the year. There is a number at the end of the year that tells you if you succeeded. So that's why I'm focusing there. It's a little harder to say, did you succeed at more family time? Well, what is more? 1 minute, right? And I have goal setting. There's a session on that, SMART goals and all that stuff that you can try to put some metrics in there. But I'm sticking with money because it's easy. And so she said, well, this year I'm going to add accountability. She's beginning again more intelligently. She's got a new tool in her belt and she's going to try again. So that was Henry Ford's statement. Dale Carnegie said, develop successes from failures. Discouragement and failure are two of the surest stepping stones to success. I mean, that's probably not what you learned in school, right? You probably learned in school that like studying and hard work are what gets you success. Dale Carnegie, one of the most, he wrote How to Win Friends and Influence People. He's written a lot of books. He's a huge name in the leadership world and all that. Discouragement and failure are the surest stepping stones to success. Thomas Watson Sr. said, if you want to increase your success, double your rate of failure. Okay. If you want to increase your success, double your rate of failure. Anybody ever been in sales? A couple of you? If you've been in sales, you know this is true. All right? It's not about getting that perfect client. It's about getting that through those 6 no's so that you can get to that 1 yes. And if you want 2 yeses, you're going to have to go through 12 no's. And if you want 3 yeses, you're probably going to go through 40 no's. All right? And then something I said, the person who sees failure and sees success in progress is growing and doing their part to change the world. And this is really how we view others who are failing. When we have failed, we have the opportunity to see someone else's journey as success in progress. And we don't look down on them. We don't say, how could you not figure this out? I figured this out 5 years ago. What do you mean you haven't figured this out yet? No, we see it as success in progress, and we're doing our part to change the world. Oh, I was like, what in the world? I was like, why is it a black screen? All right, so many times we have classes, and in those classes we get, at the end of the class, you get like a certificate or some sort of acknowledgement. I took this class, yay. And you probably have, I don't know about any of you, but being in prison for 14 years, I've got literally, this is not an exaggeration. I think I've got a stack of certificates about that thick. I was able to do some really cool things while I was there. We'll do a Q&A afterwards if you guys want to know more. But I like that. But I really like celebrating actual success. And so we have said today that failure is part of success. Now here's the reality. You can come to this room today and you can walk out completely the same person that you walked in as. Just the reality. How many of you ever walked into a class and 2 days later you don't even remember what the class was about? Keep your hands up if 2 minutes later you didn't remember what the class was about, right? That's our reality, okay? So that's on you. But here's what I did. I asked you all to fill out a page, and I believe, I kind of kept an eye on it, everybody wrote something on their page, right? Perfect. I'm not here to celebrate that you're here today. I'm glad you are. It's an honor to be able to share with you today, but that's not what we're going to celebrate. What we are going to celebrate today, the top ones were the ones that are here, correct? The ones that were outside the folder?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. What we are going to celebrate today, each of you is going to get a certificate with your name printed on it. And it does not say this certificate is presented to so-and-so for participating in Failure, the Stepping Stone to Success class. Sorry, I don't care. Here's what it says. This certificate is proudly presented in recognition of enduring catastrophic failure and debilitating difficulty that led to learning invaluable lessons and gaining immeasurable development, leading to success at a level previously not thought possible. That's what I want to celebrate today. You failed. That's part of your journey. So I'm going to call you up here one by one. We're not quite done, but as we wrap up, I want to start by calling off your names, and we're going to give you a hand, and we're celebrating your journey of success, proudly recognizing that failure was a part of that.